Hello, Doug Mcguire. You're from the Mountain Partnership Secretariat. Could you tell me why you're here at COP16?
Well, we're here representing the Mountain Partnership, which is a global partnership of many members, over 170 members. It's one of the partnerships that came out of Johannesburg in 2002. And we're working with a number of our members to try to focus greater attention on mountain issues within the climate change context, and trying to bring out the importance of mountains, not only for the sake of mountain environments and mountain communities, but because of the global significance of mountains and the impact that climate change is having and the effects of that even in downstream areas as well. So it's about awareness raising and also trying to work with some of the government members of the partnership in terms of trying to have more of an influence in the climate change discussions.
So what are the global significances of the mountains?
Well, mountains, I think a lot of people are aware that they are the water towers of the world. We often hear about them referred to as water towers. They provide overall about 50% of fresh water to the world. They are very important areas in terms of biodiversity. More than half of the world's hotspots, global biodiversity hotspots, are found in mountain regions. So the significance goes way beyond the communities and the environments themselves. But that said, there are also areas where probably the poorest and hungriest people in the world live. When we talk about food insecurity and poverty, mountains, because they're so removed, they're distant, they're isolated, living conditions are very, very harsh. So poverty and food insecurity are very, very important in mountain areas. So there's both dimensions. There's the local dimension, which in and of itself is really, really important. 12% of the world's population live in mountains. And then the global significance is huge because it impacts all of us.
And if we use them as a litmus test, how do they show climate change is happening?
Well, mountains tend to be very, very sensitive ecosystems, and they are often referred to as indicators of climate change because the changes that happen because of global warming and other aspects of climate change, they tend to be felt very quickly in mountain ecosystems. So the changes are happening much faster to mountains. This is one of the big problems we have, is that temperature rises tend to be faster in mountains. In some areas they've been 2 degrees Celsius higher than in other ecosystems, and the importance of that is that we can have a sense of what's happening in the rest of the world, on the rest of the planet, often because of what's happening in mountains first. So they're very fragile ecosystems. They're changing very quickly, and they're very sensitive to a lot of the impacts that are happening as a result of climate change.
Do you have a view on the controversy over melting glaciers in the IPCC report?
Well, I would say it's almost a non-issue in that we know that change is happening very, very quickly. The empirical evidence is there. The scientific, there was a bit of controversy over some of the data, but I think that is not, in the big scheme of things, very significant. We have been dealing with a number of scientists who have been following glacier movements over the past 20, 30 years. And when they go back and they see the situation today compared to 30 years ago, it's astounding. It's unbelievable what's happening. So the science is crucial. It's very, very important. But I think we need to keep in mind that when there may not be perfect data coming out and perfect science, it doesn't mean that the problem is not there. The problem is huge, and it's impacting mountain communities and downstream populations in a very, very fast way. So there's an urgency issue to what's happening in mountains. The science side is very important, as I said, but we have a lack of data. We do not understand a lot about what's happening in mountain areas because there has not been consistent monitoring of the situation over many, many years, as we've found in many other parts of the world. And so that presents challenges because good policy needs to be based on good science. And the research community globally is very aware of that. There have been recently some important scientific conferences. Recently in Scotland, in Perth, there was a conference of about 500 researchers who came together focusing only on mountain issues. And there's an increasing awareness that we need to do much more and much faster in terms of understanding what's happening in mountain environments, not only from the biophysical side, but from the socioeconomic side as well.
So how long do you think this research will take to come out?
Well, I think when we talk about research, we're talking about long-term processes. So research programs need to be reinforced, but we're talking about over a period of years before probably really solid data is coming out, because you need a long-term really monitoring and assessment situation to really understand what trends are. And when we're talking about mountains and climate change, these are often long-term processes. Nevertheless, one of the things that's happening now is a much greater inclusion and integration of local communities in research efforts. And so local knowledge, traditional knowledge, and indigenous knowledge is being incorporated with research programs so that what those communities know and their ability to monitor over a period of time can really be brought into the research process. So it's a very encouraging thing to see that it's not just research happening coming from a research university setting, but really integrating with local communities, and I think that's going to allow for even faster results to be generated in certain areas.
And more valid results, really. More valid results.
More valid results. Yeah. More valid results, and I think in some ways results that can be also used by those communities who are living in and managing those ecosystems. There's often a big gap between research and practice, research and policy. That's one of the things that the research community is waking up to, the fact that that gap between research and decision making needs to be closed. And that has a lot to do with how research results are communicated. So I think we're seeing, to me it's a very positive sign that the importance of research is recognized, but how it's applied to policy and decision making is an issue. It's being addressed in a more serious way now by the research community.
So linked to this, and in the short term, how are you going about raising awareness of these issues?
Well, through the Mountain Partnership, we have a variety of information mechanisms that we use to get results of research, to get information about projects and practices out to our members and even a wider stakeholder group. So we have mechanisms internally within the partnership, but we're also taking advantage of the opportunities that we have with the COPs and the SUBSTAs in the climate change context, but also in some of the other conventions. So here, for example, at COP16, we are organizing two side events looking at climate change adaptation in mountains. We held one yesterday, which was very interesting. Some cases from Peru and Chile were demonstrated. The National Program for Climate Change in Peru was presented, and Peru is such an important mountainous country that a lot of that program really relates to the mountain areas. So we're trying to present what's happening at the national and at the local level, get those practices out, greater awareness, exchanges between regions. So it was quite promising to see that. We had a couple of ministers involved in that event, so it's being taken seriously at quite a high level. Tomorrow, on Thursday, we will have an event, similar event, focusing on regional mechanisms. How are regions dealing with mountain issues, in particular climate change adaptation? And that's important because we need transboundary approaches to mountain issues, because mountains are often borders between countries, and what happens in mountains has an impact beyond just one single country in most cases. So the regional aspect is important, and we'll be highlighting, for example, what's happening in some of the convention processes, the mountain convention processes, such as the Alpine Convention and the Carpathian Convention. We'll also be talking about some less formal mechanisms. For example, in the Andean region, we have an Andean initiative within the partnership where all of the Andean governments and many other stakeholders from the region are working together to look at how to exchange information more effectively, how to address capacity building needs, how to look at local governance issues that are affecting mountains and climate change. So that's another dimension that's very important, not only looking at what's happening within countries and at the local level, but how are regions working together and how are regions connected as well.
Given how long it takes mountains to appear, it takes a very short time for them to disappear, doesn't it?
That's very true, and it's a big problem, especially with changes in temperature and precipitation. We're seeing the whole area of risk and natural disaster taking on a new meaning. Mountains are inherently inherently unstable ecosystems. But what's happening now is creating huge risks, and we hear a lot about landslides. We hear a lot about the glacial lake outburst floods, which are happening to a large extent in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. When the glaciers are receding and melting, those glacier lakes are filling very, very quickly, and often those natural dams are bursting. Not often, but more often than in the past. And so it's putting many, many downstream communities who are living in the path of that flow at very high risk. So the instability of mountains is inherent, but it's becoming a more and more critical issue. So yes, mountains take a long time to form, but a relatively short time to hopefully not disappear, but those processes are very, very quick and very strong.
Doug Mcguire, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.